Good morning to everyone from the assembled delegates from schools around the world, and of course the students of Ritsumeikan regime. It's an honor and a sincere pleasure to be here. I can already sense the future. To be honest with you, this, after having spoken several occasions in universities, this is the first time since I graduated from high school that I get the opportunity to address high school students. And it's probably more rewarding than speaking to university students. This year's theme, what is creativity? What is creative? What does it mean to be creative? Yeah, I think it's a very important thing. It's going to shape, or it has shaped the world, and it's going to shape the world. And I am here, I think, because what I do is considered one of the most creative professions. While being creative is related to creating and creation, and my work invariably is about creation, I believe that creativity, being creative, reaches much, much further, covers a much wider area than that. The dictionary defines creativity as the use of imagination or original ideas. Perhaps being creative was one of the most important pushes to turn us humans from the Homo erectus into the Homo sapiens. From the early humans that had stood up on their hind legs to those who we are still today. We were creative in finding ways that gave us advantages over other animals. Much stronger and faster. Animals that were far superior in most aspects, except for that one thing that made the difference, creativity. All of us living creatures, and I'm including plants, animals, We were all living within the same constraints, but the use of imagination and original ideas let us humans become more and more flexible to deal with these constraints. We kept inventing. And we did so with relentless perseverance and patience, without giving up until the problem was solved. Always, intuition played a crucial role. There were those moments when we had a hunch, right? And we pursued these intuitions, often driven by a hunger more than that caused by our empty stomachs. Often driven by uncertainty, because there was no time for complacency. It was uncertain times, we didn't know what to eat the next day. And so it was no surprise that we became more and more curious. Today, some 200,000 years later, these fundamentals of creativity haven't changed. Now you can already sense that, thinking about all the man-made catastrophes, that our creativity has also led to very, very unfortunate things. It's not always been positive. Now one thing, when I say nothing has changed, one thing that has changed is that for the first time creativity has become a buzzword. Now everybody's creative. Creativity recently ranked #1 in job applications in Germany. It seems that the more boring the jobs on offer are, the more often applications read strength, creativity. I am creative. Which is of course a strange thing, because if that person had been really creative, he or she would surely have chosen different words. But creativity is not a title, not the sign that has to be on a building to tell us what it is. Creativity is a process. It happens somewhere between, or as an interaction between these fundamentals that haven't changed. To connect and to interact. And we heard these words from Mr. Fox, how important it is to collaborate. And creativity reaches out across disciplines. When you're within your solitary chamber, you're confining your creativity to a very, very small box. You have to reach out. Today I'm going to talk about 5 of these fundamentals that I've just touched upon, describing the humans over the past 200,000 years or so. 5 ingredients of what makes creativity. They are production, perseverance, intuition, uncertainty, and curiosity. Production. Let me start with a quote from no other than Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Data, data, data! I can't make bricks without clay! Now picture the situation. There's a man, he's enraged to a point where his impatience seems to make him burst, since he knows that something is about to come to light. Only he can't see it because of lack of material, because the world around him is too slow to feed his hungry brain. Sherlock Holmes, of course, is the master of all detectives because of his creative abilities. It is his creativity that enables him to connect the dots. Yet even he, the master, can't do anything without data, data, data. Creating is like that. You're not going to get anywhere without lots of materials. So being creative means to produce much and forget, destroy, throw away much. It's all about choices, about being able to choose from alternatives, and about having to select. In a time when the number of choices is so easily increased by algorithmic powers unknown until only a few decades ago, the act of having to choose is often cruel. When I produce architecture, I look at hundreds and hundreds of alternatives, and you have to choose. When working on projects, I sometimes, and perhaps I should admit that it's more than sometimes, drive my office nuts by getting choices, by asking for alternatives, by getting these alternatives developed to a point that are actually buildable as another building, but they don't get built. And by procrastinating the decision-making that will eliminate many of these choices. Because once you make that choice, you're flying. You have just got rid of the rest. You need to follow the path that you've chosen. You have to keep going. Until we decide on something, everything is possible. Once you do decide, you need to stick with it until every single possibility of it has been tested. Creativity means to produce and persevere. The next ingredient of creativity, perseverance. One of the most famous and most influential architects of the 20th century is Mies van der Rohe. And he's famous for his less is more. And he said, You can't invent a new architecture every Monday, which is of course true. Creating can be tough. Most of what you produce is rubbish, trash, for the bin. But you don't know that while you're working on it. On the contrary, if you start to think that while you're working on it, this is going to be rubbish, you lose faith, or worse, interest. You stop before seeing it to the end, before experiencing the moment of truth. The moment when you can really say that it is good or bad. Because you have gone every possible way, because you have followed through. That is, if you have set out the rules, if you have defined the problem. Creativity means solving problems rigorously. You need to continue following the very rules and constraints that you want to break open. I would argue that the most creative fields work with the most severe constraints. And by working with them, they loosen them, they break them. Without perseverance, and we could also call this determination, there is no creativity. When I had graduated from high school, pretty much the same age that you are now, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do with my life. It didn't take long before I was teaching those who taught me how to weld, how much fun it was to weld all the scrap metal into sculptures. Luckily, the boss never got to know why the amount of scrap metal had suddenly become less and less. At the end of my working experience, I had some fairly bad-looking sculptures, but still no clue what to do with the rest of my life. But I had learned what it meant to take something, and more importantly, someone, out of context, to produce something crazily new out of waste materials. There are theories that say that every sentence in every language has already been said. So you're hearing just something that's already been said. The great Argentine author, José Luis Borges, even created a library that would hold every possible combination of the alphabet, 99% of it unintelligible gibberish. In this short book, which you all should read, Borges creates his own universe, declaring that the possibilities of human creation are finite. And yet, in reality, we continue to create new things almost every Monday. Sometimes, actually most of the times, creating something new means putting the existing in a new context. Marcel Duchamp was a pioneer of this. In 1917, in the midst of the First World War, he took a urinal, turned it 90 degrees, and, having signed it with a pseudonym, gave it the title Fountain. A urinal turned fountain. It caused, of course, a scandal. The exhibition was forbidden and so on and so on. Steve Jobs, who we just heard about, he didn't invent the telephone. He made it better by combining it with something else he didn't invent, the touch panel. In fact, he lifted the telephone to a new level, to something that would surely have a different name, if not for its predecessor. Phonos, means, Greek, referring to sound. Whereas the transmission of sound is merely one of the many ways to communicate these days, with so-called phones. If you look at the science fiction series of the 60s, 70s, we saw the communicators, right? Probably that's what these things would be called if there hadn't been a telephone. The entire music industry is undergoing a drastic change. Some artists are complaining that now, with the ubiquity of sampling software, everyone can be creative, everyone can create hits. Other artists, of course, are embracing these technologies as their own and creating. Like always, when creativity dies, many resort to lamenting. In Thomas Jefferson's words, however, the world belongs to the living. The person who invented the light bulb, right? The light bulbs that are now getting less and less, Thomas Edison. He said, and I think most of you know that quote, he said, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Now, I've talked about the 99%, the perseverance. You know, it's a lot of perspiration, and a lot of it is, in a different sense, perspiration than Edison meant. It's because you start to feel uneasy about things not coming out. Perspiration, the 99%. But there's a recent article in the New York Times, carried the title, "Sure, big data is great, but so is intuition." And the article went on to ask what makes a good data scientist, and there was a Google researcher and she said, well, obviously it's math, doing math and computer science skills. That's really important. But so is intuition. So creativity happens between perseverance and intuition. Pablo Picasso, he said, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child." Now, as some of you surely know, Raphael was an outstanding painter and architect of the High Renaissance, around 1500. Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci were considered the masters of their time. Raphael got forgotten more than the others, but by the time Picasso said these words, Raphael was perhaps regarded even higher for his purist approach than the other two. So if you believe Picasso, it took him 4 years of perseverance to reach a level of highest human achievement. By the way, Raphael died when he was 37. But the entire time of his life to learn to paint like a child. Picasso is talking about a creativity that seems innate to children, the uninhibited stream of intuition. Something that authors who write books, they translated it in the stream of consciousness, that the uninhibited creation. When we are born, we sort of pop into this world playing naturally in the 3 dimensions that surround us. In fact, this is probably the most natural way of both searching to understand what this is all about and expressing ourselves. And yet, as soon as our hands show enough sensory qualities, we are given pencil and paper. And just about as naturally, we start to venture into abstraction, trying to render what we see, hear, touch, and sometimes even what we smell and taste into drawings, into flat drawings. And yet, strangely, at some point, inhibition kicks in. We get stuck in making strange copies of other images. We lose the possibility to see the world. It's a bit like taking a photograph of a photograph, where your content is confined to what somebody else has already seen and taken and selected. We lose the world around us. The best outcome here could be a perfect copy. But we stand hardly any chance because we lack the circumstances that produce the original image. And for this reason, the copies that we are producing are nowhere near being interesting. But it's neither right or wrong. It's often a process. It's often a process that most of us have to go through to learn. Some of us, however, are able to make that step, to break out from the confinement and produce originals of our own. For some of this happens early, for others late. It doesn't matter. Creativity has no age. Perseverance and intuition. Only when you relentlessly continue, even during those times when nothing seems to go right, when you don't see anything coming about, and only when you rigorously stick to the rules that you've found when defining the problem, only then are you giving yourself a chance for those precious moments of intuition. Intuitions and perseverance, they need each other more than ever in those times, sometimes cruelly long times of uncertainty. Creativity happens between intuition and uncertainty. At the end of my studies, when I was supposed to design a final work to graduate from university, I ventured into an unknown territory. At the time, we university students were supposed to select one of the given assignments and get it done with. Graduate. These assignments are a bit like maths exam, only that instead of 90 minutes, you have 6 months to solve the problem, and the solution is presented not in a few numbers, but on several square meters of drawings and a heap of models. I just couldn't get myself to it. I couldn't see how designing a library or a museum or whatever you would be answering any of the things that had accumulated in my mind during the years before. I started searching for what the problem was. It wasn't that I knew that I was going to search. Years of studying architecture had made me considerably uncertain. Uncertain of those things that most people consider just that, certain, fixed, decided. Is it really that simple? Is it really my task to just solve a problem that someone else has come up with? So my thesis project, without me knowing it, became a search for all that I had supposedly learned, and a search to destroy all that I had supposedly learned. A search for the problem that I was slowly, painstakingly solving. It turned out to be an intriguingly difficult project, for I argued against the massive urban planning that cemented urban stretches, where the unplanned had once been the best part of the city. And it was an intriguingly beautiful project, because it dealt with uncertainty, undecidedness, frailty, curiosity at an urban level. I can still remember a very porky professor, who was a very conservative guy. And this guy, when I finished my presentation, which took about an hour or so, he had tears in his eyes. And he mumbled, he didn't really want to admit it, but he mumbled he didn't know that architecture was that poetic and beautiful. So in a way, one could say that my architectural adventures began by searching for it. And even today, I believe I'm very much at the early stage of that search. And just between you and me, don't tell anyone, I hope that this search is going to continue, because I know that searching is part of creating. And I'm quite positive that my curiosity will make sure that I keep searching. Creativity happens somewhere between uncertainty and a state of hungriness that we sometimes call curiosity. Picasso, whom I was just talking about, and who it took his life to learn how to paint like a child. He almost paraphrased himself when he famously said, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up." At a time when many of you are trying to shed the child in you naturally, that's the age, I wish you all the courage, all the curiosity and the determination to keep the most important part of this child in you with you always. Thank you.